So we are now officially launching this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, good afternoon to who is with us. No, not good afternoon, but good morning, because it's still the morning, to who is with us at the International Environment House. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx or is now watching the recording of this event. The Geneva Environment Network has the pleasure to welcome you today for the briefing on the Global Intergovernmental Meeting on Minerals and Metals that will take place in Geneva in early September. The event will be chaired by Mr. Arnold Kreilhuber, who is the Director of the Europe Office of the United Nations Environment Programme. Before I hand over to Mr. Kreilhuber, and you are formally welcome to this event, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the webpage of this event will be available on the webpage of this event. The link is being shared in the chat for who is online and is also available on the screen. Throughout the event, those of you who are online can raise their questions by using the Q&A box. We have a dedicated session to answer these after the presentation if time allows. Finally, let me also add for those who are online that the transcription is available at the bottom left of your screen. Have a look at the current slide, which shows where to access automated transcripts in 100 languages. And with that, Mr. Kreilhuber, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana. And let me also welcome you again to this very important briefing on the upcoming Global Intergovernmental Meeting on Minerals and Metals. Those who have been able to join us physically here in the International Environment House in today very tropical Geneva, but also to all the colleagues and stakeholders who have joined us online. This meeting and this briefing, as Diana has mentioned, is organized in the context of the Geneva Environment Network, but also with various stakeholders from Geneva and beyond. We are very fortunate, I think, that we're able to hold this briefing here in Geneva, where so many of the relevant stakeholders for this issue are conducting their work. So we are very lucky that we have a fantastic panel of speakers and stakeholders with us this morning. Today's event will provide an overview of where the international community has come so far with this process, which was, of course, mandated by UNEA 5 in Resolution 5.12. And it will give the different stakeholders, member states, an opportunity to provide their input and their considerations as far as this stock taking is concerned, and share their perspectives with all of us on this important issue. We hope that we will have a considerable chunk of time at the end of this event for Q&A, but that will, of course, depend on my discipline as your moderator, but also on the discipline of the many speakers that we have. And so let me lead by example and hand it over right away to Martine Rhone-Brossard, who is one of the co-chairs of this process, representing Switzerland, not only our hosts here in Geneva, but also together with Pakistan, one of the co-chairs of this intergovernmental process. Madame Rhone-Brossard is the Deputy Head of the International Affairs Division in the Federal Office for the Environment of Switzerland. Madame, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arnold, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here in Geneva to explain you a little bit what we have done as co-chair of this very important process. It was a big honor, and I was also a little humble because I went to all the region of UN region. I went to Chile, to Dakar, I went to Thailand also, Bangkok. It was a meeting in Geneva, a meeting in Paris also, and we could really see the diversity of needs also regarding minerals and metals. And you can imagine why Switzerland? Why is Switzerland so dedicated to this theme? We don't have so many metals and minerals as in other parts of the world, but we are consumers. And as consumers, we also be part of this life cycle value change a little bit. And another very important point for me, we have 3 crises. Climate, biodiversity, and pollution. And to find a solution to climate change, to the climate crisis, we say we need more sustainable energy, but these sustainable energy are need a lot of minerals, and we have to be careful not to shift the climate crisis to resources or to a mineral crisis, and to have this in mind. And during our regional consultation with my dear co-chair from Pakistan, Sakleen, it was such rich discussion with countries. They were very engaged. We have now, I think, about 120 national focal points on this subject. We hope we will get more, but it's already a lot of committed countries. And we had also very good discussion with stakeholders. And we had also international organization being with us on the whole journey also. And the journey, I can tell you, it will continue, because we see common needs, for example, for an assessment on standards. We see needs on sand observatory. We see needs on tailing issues. We see needs on small-scale mining, for example. And we had a lot of proposals. And I think, I don't know many, perhaps 50 or something like that, and you can have a look at this proposal on the GGKP webpage. And at the global meeting, what you introduced just before on the 7th and 8th of September, together, all these countries all together will have the opportunities to exchange about this proposal, but also with all stakeholders together, and probably to prioritize which one should we put forward for the next UNEA. And also, it will not be finished at UNEA 6. I think the journey will continue with perhaps a working group dedicated to some specific issues to continue the discussion. So back to you, and I'm very glad to be here and to hear all this interesting presentation and questions.
Thank you very much, Martina. We're really grateful for Switzerland's leadership on this important issue. And you've already highlighted to us the many facets of this journey that we're on to ensure or enhance the environmental sustainability of metals and minerals. Let's go a bit more into the intergovernmental aspects of this, but also how all of this sits in the context of the triple planetary crisis that you have mentioned and UNEP's mandate. I've already mentioned the underlying UNEA resolution in this aspect. And in order to help us do this, we are joined by my dear colleague, Elisa Tonda, who's the chief of the Resources and Markets branch. And Elisa is normally based in Geneva, but today she will join us from Paris online. Elisa, over to you.
Thank you very much, Arnold, and greetings from an equally tropical Paris these days. And what I'll be spending a few minutes on is just to remind us the context of our conversation. In the introduction, Arnold and Martina already alluded to the fact that we're operating in the context of a resolution approved at the first session of the UN Environment Assembly in 2022, a resolution that focuses on environmental aspects of minerals and metals management. And it does so across the full life cycle of those minerals and metals. And I want to add, prior to going into the specifics of the resolutions, three aspects that are helping us see why it is so critical that precisely now that resolution has mandated a specific process and a number of other activities. Obviously, one element of the context that stresses the importance of this process is highlighted in the resolution itself, where member states are acknowledging that clean technologies that are so important for the clean energy transition, for a green economy, are highly dependent on minerals and metals, but also that context set in the resolution stresses the important contribution that an environmentally sustainable management of minerals and metals makes to the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. That context is also underpinned by a recent policy brief from the UN Secretary General, that again stresses the importance of the issues that we have at hand. That policy brief reminds us that mineral resource extraction plays a dominant role in the economies of 81 countries. Those countries account for a quarter of global GDP. They account for half of world's population, and nearly 70% of those living in extreme poverty. And the last connecting factor I want to put in terms of context is very much echoing what Martine was alluding to in the earlier intervention, and recognizing that the mining and metal sector is extremely important if we are to advance in our fight to address the three crises of pollution, of biodiversity loss, and of climate change, being that one of the central pillars of UNEP medium-term strategy until 2025. In that context, that stresses the importance of our focus on mining and metals, comes the resolution 12, approved at UNEA 5, with three specific requests being put forward to UNEP Executive Director. One being a request reflected in its second operating paragraph to convene transparent and inclusive intergovernmental regional consultations to feed into a global intergovernmental meeting with the aim of developing non-prescriptive proposals to enhance environmental sustainability of minerals and metals across their full life cycle. And I've spent time to reflect on these operating paragraphs, because these will be very much the focus of our conversation. And a lot of the elements of that mandate have a very critical importance vis-a-vis the process that we will be sharing with you today, but also the discussions that we will be having. The resolution adds two more mandates, one of which being around strengthening scientific, technical, and policy knowledge with regard to sand, and support global policies and action in relation to environmentally sound extraction and use of sand, as well as another mandate around the compilation of a report on knowledge gaps in relation to environmental aspects of tailing management. As said, today in our conversation, we'll be very much focusing on the intergovernmental process that unfolded, and that will conclude in a couple of weeks' time with what was reflected as the global intergovernmental meeting that is scheduled to take place in Geneva on the 7th and 8th of September, with a very, very clear objective of going in depth into what we have learned in the regional consultations, and also provide an opportunity to member states and stakeholders to really go in depth and further discuss and refine what are referred to in the resolution as the non-prescriptive proposals, and take that conversation further. So Arnold, I'm handing the floor back to you, knowing that we will be going much more in depth into those elements during our conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Elisa, for giving us this framework, but also highlighting again what's at stake here for so many countries and stakeholders around the globe. You mentioned, and Martine has mentioned it as well, that a big portion of this process that we're looking at is based on regional consultations. And right next to you, Elisa, in Paris, sits another UNEP colleague, Charlotte Ndakorerwa, and she will detail to us now a little bit the outcomes of these regional consultations and present the background document that is building on these consultations for the intergovernmental meeting in September here in Geneva. Charlotte, let me give the floor to you.
Thank you, Arnold. And if I could kindly ask to put up the presentation and just move to the maybe slide number 4. Yes, so next slide. I will just skip the beginning because Elise already touched upon the requests of the UNEA resolution. Next slide, please. Thank you. So maybe just to give a brief introduction into the objectives and expectations of the upcoming Global Intergovernmental Meeting. The meeting will address the mandate of the resolution, which was just outlined by my colleague Elisa, and will further develop and refine non-prescriptive proposals that member states and other stakeholders have already put forward during the regional consultations, but also through written submissions that we have been receiving. The outcome of the meeting will be a co-chair's summary, which will be available shortly after the meeting, as well as a progress report of the UNEP Executive Director, which will be put forward at the next session of the UN Environment Assembly in February next year. We expect that during the global meeting, all participants will engage actively on the mandates of the resolution to further discuss, refine, and maybe even prioritize some of the non-prescriptive proposals. And we have developed a background document which will provide further guidance for the global meeting, and which I will speak to briefly as well, and which we will also post into the chat so that you can have a look at more details of the document. Next slide, please. I will speak in the next slide to the more detailed structure of the meeting, but just to inform you that the meeting, so as we already said, will take place on 7th and 8th of September at the International Conference Center in Geneva. It will be a 2-day meeting, which will be hybrid, allowing for in-person and online participation, and which will be facilitated by the 2 co-chairs from Switzerland and Pakistan. We will also be providing interpretation into all 6 official UN languages throughout the meeting. The meeting is open to member states, and as was already mentioned, member states have nominated national focal points to engage in this process, as well as international organizations, MEAs, and accredited civil society organizations that can participate as observers. Registration for the meeting is still open until 1st of September, and we are providing funding for 1 representative per eligible member state, as well as a number of accredited civil society representatives. Next slide, please. We have developed a background document that is available online and which I invite you to have a look at. I will not go so much into the details in the interest of time. It provides an overview of the outcomes of all regional consultations, as well as an analysis of the written submissions that we've received. We had around 36, next slide, please. We had around 38 non-prescriptive proposals that were developed in the 5 regional consultations that we held between April and July. And we had another around 30 written submissions that we received from member states as either individual submissions, but also a few joint submissions and contributions from other stakeholders. What we have done in the background document is that we analyzed the non-prescriptive proposals, which were very broad because they really looked at the entire life cycle of minerals and metals, and included topics such as artisanal small-scale mining, sand, tailings, policies. And we have grouped them into 3 thematic clusters. The first one is on policy and tools, the second one on minerals and metals along the entire life cycle, and the third one on platforms for international cooperation. And I invite you to look at the background document that really outlines all of the 24 non-prescriptive proposals and how we've clustered them in the 3 clusters. Next slide, please. In terms of the agenda of the global meeting, the way that we propose to conduct the meeting is that on day one in the morning, we will open with a plenary, which will go into more details in terms of the background document and outcomes of the regional consultations, presenting the non-prescriptive proposals, as well as having a panel discussion. In the afternoon of day one, we will organize breakout groups discussion with all participants according to these three clusters which I just presented. And the discussion in breakout groups in 3 rooms will continue in the morning of day 2 to allow all participants to be able to fully engage on all of the clusters and allow enough time for that. And as mentioned, the breakout group discussions will also be interpreted into all UN official languages. The afternoon of day 2 will be a report back from the discussions into a plenary, as well as the presentation of the draft co-chairs summary of the meeting. You will also see that we offer the opportunity for side events during the lunch break. We will be able to host 2 side events in parallel on day 1, as well as 2 side events also in parallel on day 2. And there will be also a reception at the end of day 1 hosted by Switzerland. Next slide, please. The link here gives you the list of all national focal points, and we are updating the list on a regular basis. If you notice that the information is not correct, please feel free to reach out to us and we can correct that. In the run-up to the global meeting, we are organizing a few events and meetings to raise awareness of the resolution and also prepare participants to engage in the meeting. Last week, we organized a briefing to UNEP member states. We have today's briefing, and we will also be organizing a meeting and briefing to the UN Environment Management Group on 30th of August, as well as a joint event that we're organizing with World Resources Forum on the 6th of September, so just a day before the start of the global meeting. Next slide, please. The next slides actually just contain a few more resources for further information, which I invite you to have a look at and reach out to us if you have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for this useful information. And I assume participants of this briefing have access to these links in the materials page on the GEN website. Let's move now into the stakeholder perspectives of this briefing. And I'm very happy that we're joined by national focal points in this meeting who represent countries where some of these regional consultations have taken place. And we will start this journey in Chile. And I'm very, very happy that Gabriela Encina Vera, the Chief of Sustainable Development Division in the Ministry of Mining of Chile, is able to join us. The regional consultations for Latin America and the Caribbean states took place in Chile in May of this year. Gabriela, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to say hello to everyone. We had this regional consultation on May of this year here in Santiago de Chile. We had this hybrid format with more than 20 countries, observers and civil society speakers. And we reached to 8 topics with many proposals. I will be very strict with the time. We had these 8 topics about sand, mine tailings, mine closure, public trust, multi-stakeholders dialogue, international best practices, standards and instruments, implementation of Agenda 2030, sustainable consumption and production, and working groups. Those are the 8 topics that we reach in this regional consultation. Most of the main proposals were establish a global sand observatory regarding to mine tailings, to establish national focal points to follow the implementation of the global industry standard for tailings management. In mine closure, establishment of closure criteria and environmental, social, economic guidelines for mine closure based on indicators. We in this region we have very many differences between countries. On public trust, we propose to support the implementation of Escazú Agreement and develop dialogue mechanisms and regional or national policy dialogues with all stakeholders, including with the support of the UN. Regarding to international best practices, we propose several things about collection and update these best practices, assess of gaps and prioritization in line with the triple planetary crisis, support for how to apply such measures to national level, and explore the idea of an international agreement to support environmental consideration in mining, as in the update of national legislation. About the working group, we propose to establish an expert working group on mineral and metals sustainability composed by national focal points and observers to follow up the non-prescriptive proposals. And create a Latin American and Caribbean network of experts on mining and sustainability. As I said, we have in this region, in Latin America and Caribbean, we have many differences between legislation and the way to apply that. We have some countries that are already looking for new legislation, and other countries that doesn't have any. So these proposals are aimed to that. We already have this proposal to this meeting, and I think that's it. That's all the outcomes of the regional consultation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, for highlighting to us the non-prescriptive proposals for this intergovernmental process coming out from the Latin American and Caribbean region, and for joining us here at this briefing. Next, we will travel to Africa. And the regional consultations for Africa took place in Senegal in July of this year. And we are joined by Khadija Drame, the Deputy Coordinator of the Legal Affairs Unit in the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. Khadija, you have the floor.
Bonjour tout le monde, j'espère que quelqu'un pourra l'interprétation. C'est bon? Vous m'entendez? You hear me?
Oui, on vous entend. Tout est en ordre. On va essayer de traduire ma collègue Diana.
Merci beaucoup.
Va essayer de le faire.
Khadija, tu dois parler, faire des phrases très courtes, en fait, et puis permettre à UNEP de traduire.
Let me translate this now in English. So we will attempt a simultaneous, almost simultaneous translation. And Khadija, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup encore une fois. Bonjour à tout le monde. Je voudrais réitérer en tout cas mon contentement d'avoir rencontré à nouveau les coprésidents Martine, Jahiza et Charlotte, Laura également. Je pense qu'on va rappeler un peu ce qui s'est passé à Dakar par rapport à la mise en œuvre de la résolution minière, de la résolution 512 sur les aspects environnementaux de la gestion des minéraux et métaux. La consultation régionale s'est tenue à Dakar du 5 au 6 juillet et elle a vu la participation de 27 États africains qui ont contribué activement aux travaux. Et comme résultat sorti de cette réunion, les contributions, en tout cas, ont rappelé les spécificités des États en matière de gestion environnementale des ressources minérales. Et chaque pays a eu quand même l'occasion d'exposer les activités qui se passent dans leurs États, mais également les initiatives et les bonnes pratiques qui sont prises par les États pour assurer une gestion environnementale de ces ressources minières. Et comme spécificité, en tout cas, du continent africain, on avait mis l'accent sur la gestion de l'exploitation minière artisanale qui pose extrêmement de dégâts sur l'environnement compte tenu des produits qui sont utilisés dans cette activité. Et comme autre spécificité du continent africain, on avait abordé la problématique de la réhabilitation des sites miniers. Et je pense que dans nos forêts, on se rend compte que c'est des carrières, des excavations qui sont laissées, en tout cas, et qui causent énormément de dégâts. Et comme autre spécificité du continent africain, on avait abordé la problématique de la gestion des résidus miniers qui pose problème, compte tenu du fait qu'on ne dispose pas d'assez d'installations techniques de traitement de ces résidus miniers. Et la réunion avait abordé la problématique de la gestion du sable. Il y a une présentation qui a été faite. Et là également, on avait accueilli, en tout cas favorablement et à l'unanimité, l'idée de la mise en place d'un observatoire sur le sable. Et là, je pense également par rapport aux prochaines étapes pour la mise en place de cet observatoire, le continent africain est vraiment engagé, en tout cas pour la suite. Et comme autre idée qui a été accueillie favorablement lors de la consultation régionale, c'était l'idée d'une évaluation globale des instruments qui existent actuellement sur la gestion des ressources minières, parce qu'on sait que malgré l'existence des conventions internationales, des lignes directrices et autres, la gestion minière pose toujours problème. Donc, je pense que pour que les États puissent donner des orientations concrètes, il faut qu'on aille d'abord vers cette évaluation et à l'issue, on aura quand même une idée précise de ce qu'on doit faire pour assurer une gestion écologiquement rationnelle des ressources minières. Et comme autre idée qui était ressortie de ces consultations, c'était quand même le renforcement de la coopération internationale. Si on sait que les États africains n'ont pas, en tout cas, assez outillés pour faire face à la problématique. Du coup, la coopération internationale permettrait quand même d'améliorer en tout cas la gestion environnementale de ces ressources minières. Et la soumission africaine a été faite également. Nous n'avons pas, en tout cas, on s'était mis d'accord pour faire une soumission globale pour tout le continent africain et j'ai eu à coordonner l'élaboration de ce document qui est basé sur le rapport qui a été produit par Charlotte, mais également les autres idées qui ont été émises qui n'étaient pas en tout cas émises lors de l'atelier. Et la soumission a été faite, si je ne me trompe pas, le 30 juillet, ce qui reflète un peu la position du continent africain. Et comme autre information que j'ai eu à donner, personnellement, j'ai pris part à la conférence ministérielle africaine sur l'environnement qui s'est tenue récemment à Addis Abeba, et je remercie le gouvernement suisse également d'avoir supporté ma participation à cette importante réunion. Et malheureusement, il n'y avait pas beaucoup de points focaux, en tout cas, qui ont pris part à cette conférence, mais j'ai quand même essayé, et je l'ai réussi, d'intégrer la résolution 512 dans l'une des décisions de la conférence, parce qu'il y avait une décision qui portait sur la gestion, sur les minerais critiques, le rôle des minerais critiques dans la transition énergétique. Et là également, nous, la délégation sénégalaise, on leur avait dit que c'est bien d'en parler, mais il faut tenir compte du fait que tous les États ne sont pas concernés par ces minerais critiques. Maintenant, pour les autres États qui n'en ont pas, il faudra qu'on ait une approche globale et l'attaquer sous l'angle de la gestion environnementale. Et de là, on a quand même, j'ai inséré la résolution 512 sur le préambule, même également les résultats, la soumission qui a été soumise dans le cadre de ce processus, les résultats ont été insérés dans cette décision. Et je pense que pour le moment, je m'en arrête là pour la suite. Si j'ai d'autres éléments d'information, je reviendrai. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
So,
Diana, can I ask you to...
So very briefly, Senegal has thanked the co-chairs and the UNEP team for the support provided. The consultation in Senegal was organized for the African countries and counted on the participation of 27 member states, where they have been sharing activities already ongoing in the states and the good practices that are already in practice. And especially for the African continent, an important problem is the management of small-scale mining, as this type of exploitation create a lot of mining waste that is not, and there are not enough installations for the treatment of this waste. On the outcomes of the consultation that took place in Senegal, member states almost unanimously welcomed the idea of having an observatory for sand, as it was already mentioned also for the consultation that took place in Latin America. And the African continent is very engaged along the idea of having this observatory. Another idea that came out is the global evaluation of existing instruments for mineral resources. And this has been mentioned by Khalid as important to have an idea of where we need to act. And she also mentioned the reinforcement of international cooperation. She raised the fact that African states are not enough equipped to deal with these problems of the environmental management of the mineral resources and its waste, and they need some help. And she also mentioned the global submission of all the African continents that was made on 30th of July. And she ended by mentioning that she attended the African ministerial meeting on the environment that took place in Addis Abeba some weeks ago. She could attend this meeting thanks to the Swiss who funded her participation. She mentioned that there were not, all the focal points were not present, but she managed to integrate the mentioning resolution 512 was then integrated in one of the decisions of the conference, the one on the critical minerals for the energy transition. And I think that's it. And I'm looking at Martine or colleagues in Paris. If you want to add something, don't hesitate.
Thank you very much, Diana. I think that was very impressive on such a short notice, impromptu. Let's move on to one of the key issues that has already been highlighted, which is tailings safety in in terms of addressing mineral resource or sustainable resource management as a whole. And the UNECE is, of course, a very important actor in this beyond even the UNECE region. Claudia Kamke, who's sitting next to me here, is an environmental affairs officer in the Secretariat of the Convention on the Transboundary Effects of Industrial Accidents. And she will tell us a little bit more about what we perhaps also can learn from UNECE's experience in this field. Claudia.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on UNECE's perspectives on tailings safety and sustainable resource management. So let me start with the key challenges. Next slide, please. As you know, TMFs, tailings management facilities, pose huge risks to people, the environment, and economies already today. But these risks will grow significantly, and not in a far away future, but already in this decade. Because there is an increasing, the energy transition, the green transition will also mean an increasing demand for critical raw materials, and this will create also potential shortages, dependencies, trade dependencies, geopolitical challenges, and also it means that there will be an increasing number of tailings management facilities and risks, related risks. However, we need to know these hazards and risks from tailings management facilities to be able to manage them. However, currently there is a lack of knowledge about tailings management facilities, and this refers to the number, their location, their state, condition, also possible transboundary effects that they may have, and how to effectively manage the risks from tailings management facilities within and across countries. And there's another pressure factor, and that relates to climate change. Due to climate change, we can expect more frequent and severe weather events. This will also cause more natural disasters. We already see that now. And so this will also increase the risks for potential TMF failures and also transboundary effects. So in order to manage these challenges and to achieve the SDGs, it will be key for countries to strengthen their efforts and the pace also towards sustainable resource management and tailings safety. And next slide, please. UNECE has actually well-established frameworks in place to help countries transform their mining and processing industries, such as, for example, the UNFC and UNRMS, so the United Nations Framework Classification for Resources and the Resource Management System. UNFC and UNRMS can help reduce waste, use tailings and other secondary sources, and also create value-added products. As such, they promote resource efficiency, environmental sustainability, social responsibility, and also green financing. And for your information, ECOSOC has actually endorsed UNFC and UNRMS for global application, and these frameworks and tools are basically being promoted also by the European Union, by the African Union, and by many other countries worldwide. Next slide, please. In addition, there is the UNECE Industrial Accidents Convention, which is a legal instrument that helps countries to strengthen their tailings safety and governance. Many guidance and materials and tools have been developed under the framework of the convention, and they are available for use by all UN member states. You can see some of them on the slide. For example, there are the UNECE safety guidelines and good practices for tailings management facilities. To support the practical implementation of these safety guidelines, there is also a TMF safety methodology that countries could apply on the ground. There are also policy documents such as the roadmap and a related decision on strengthening mine tailings safety, and there is an online toolkit and training on tailings safety available. These guidance materials and tools have been applied in practice in many, I would say, UNECE countries throughout the region. And this has and this resulted, for example, in the development of inventories and maps of tailings management facilities, for example, 580 for the Danube River Basin and in Central Asia, but there are others as well. This has resulted in the conduct of on-site trainings at tailings management facilities to build capacity and better understand the risks. Several countries created interinstitutional working groups on tailings safety and the prevention of accidental water pollution. And it also strengthened sub-regional and transboundary cooperation on tailings safety and governance. And I would like to highlight on the next slide, in particular, the roadmap. Because we believe that in particular the implementation of the roadmap can boost also the implementation of the UNEA resolution 5.12. UNECE countries agreed in this roadmap to strengthen tailings safety and governance in the following areas. For example, in this biennium, they agreed to improve their understanding of risks associated with tailings. They agreed to review and update existing measures and legislation with regard to that. They also agreed to enhance their coordination on this subject at the national level. And they also committed to reporting on tailings management facilities as part of the hazardous activities under the convention within the 10th reporting cycle to improve risk knowledge, basically. And on this basis, in the following biennium, as of 2025, this could be used to prepare an overview of tailings management facilities in the UNECE region, which will further improve the shared knowledge and management of these risks across the region. And depending on the availability of funds, the Secretariat could also, or was also asked to actually facilitate a multi-stakeholder dialogue on existing benefits and challenges in the UNECE region. So with this, I'd like to come to my last slide. And as you know, UNECE has been presenting at all regional consultations on the subject of tailings safety. And we would like to present a few key messages here as we go towards the intergovernmental meeting in September. We believe it's important that countries take a life cycle approach and ensure sustainable resource management to manage the green transition and achieve the SDGs. We also believe there is a need for global mapping and an assessment of existing legal and policy instruments that apply to the environmental aspects of minerals and metals, and this mapping should also include actually related guidelines, tools such as the frameworks such as the UNFC and the roadmap that I presented earlier. It will be important to strengthen the safety and governance of tailings and to prevent related accidents at tailings management facilities now. So as I mentioned, we need to basically start to protect people, the environment and economies now because of the global trends going on. And this should also include abandoned, active, inactive and future new tailings management facilities. In strengthening the safety and governance of tailings, it will be important to take an integrated risk management approach. So to also look at the impacts of climate change, of natural disasters, so-called NATEC risks, to enhance further safety measures and reduce the risks. And there is a need also for more cooperation and coordination to address tailings hazards and risks at all levels, at the national, cross-border, regional levels, among international organizations, and this should also involve all relevant stakeholders, so multi-stakeholder dialogue will be key too. And there's also a need to fill the knowledge gaps that are currently still there, for example, through the mapping of tailings management facilities, risk assessment, and also providing capacity building. And reporting and regular information exchange will also be key on lessons learned and good practices, and will also be key and valuable actually in this process. And I'd like to finish by saying that we also believe, or you know that actually tailings management facilities also pose huge risks to the nearby and riparian populations. And so it will also be important to inform them and involve those that are actually affected, also on the other side of the border. But I guess my colleague from the Aarhus Convention will elaborate a little bit more on that. So with this, I'd like to close and thank you. We have prepared additional information and slides and links for you should you be interested in the guidance materials and work that I mentioned before. So they are part of the presentation and you're invited to consult them afterwards. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Claudia, for sharing UNECE's perspectives, but also how on the topic of tailing safety, we could use some of the existing frameworks, some of the existing legal agreements to improve the resource governance. We will stay, as you have already mentioned, with legal agreements, and Teresa Meyer is a legal officer with the Aarhus Convention Secretariat, who will share with us some perspectives from the Aarhus Convention on the issue of public participation and what this process should, from the perspective of the Aarhus Convention, take into account when it comes to public participation. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd first like to thank the Geneva Environment Network for inviting the Secretariat of the Aarhus Convention to this important meeting. We see this as a great opportunity to discuss how the rights under the Aarhus Convention can significantly contribute and also support the environmentally sound management of minerals and metals. First off, to give a brief introduction about the Aarhus Convention. For those of you who may not be familiar with the convention's full name is the Convention on Access to Information, Public Participation in Decision-Making, and Access to Justice in Environmental Matters. The convention was adopted in 1998 in the city of Aarhus in Denmark and entered into force in October 2001. Currently, the convention has 47 parties from across the Eurasia region with different economic, societal, and political backgrounds, and one country from Africa, Guinea-Bissau, which has very recently acceded to the convention. Of note is also that the European Union is a party to the convention in itself, as well as its member states. The convention is a global treaty, meaning it's open to accession by any UN member states, and it also has served as a model for instruments in other regions. We've heard about the Escazú Agreement, for example, in the Latin American and the Caribbean region. Now, as to the substance of the convention, as the name already tends to give away, rests on three broad pillars and enshrines legally binding obligations in relation to these three pillars, namely, first, access to information, second, public participation in environmental decision-making, which is the pillar that I'll focus on today, and which also includes public participation in international forums. And then as a third pillar, access to justice in environmental matters. There are also two additional obligations that are worth mentioning in this context. First is Article 3.8 of the Aarhus Convention, which provides a legally binding obligation to protect environmental defenders from penalization, persecution, and harassment. The Aarhus Convention was the first international instrument that actually included such an obligation, legally binding obligation on states. In 2021, the Aarhus parties adopted Decision 7.9, which created a rapid response mechanism to deal with cases under Article 3.8. And in June 2022, so last year, the Aarhus parties elected the first special rapporteur on environmental defenders under the Aarhus Convention, Mr. Michel Forst, who receives complaints for violations of Article 3.8. This is obviously very important and topical in this context, considering that When we look at reports that we receive from NGOs, some of the most serious cases of penalization and persecution of environmental defenders actually arise in the context of extractive industries. And then the second obligation outside of those three pillars that I would like to mention is Article 3.9. Article 3.9 imposes a direct obligations on states not to discriminate based on citizenship, nationality, or domicile. And in practice, that means that in relation to all three pillars, all persons, regardless of origin, have the same rights as people living in one of the Aarhus countries parties. Now, for purposes of this short presentation, as I said, I'll focus on the public participation pillar. First, in a domestic and transboundary context, with Articles 6, 7, and 8 of the Convention. They provide for public participation requirements for decision-making in relation to activities, plans, programs, and policies and legislation, including those relating to the extractive industries. So with respect to activities, including, for example, mining licenses, extraction permits, any activity where environmental impact assessments with public participation are required under national law, the Convention provides a number of obligations, and you see them on the right-hand side of the slide. The Convention requires parties to ensure early, adequate, and effective notice of the proposed activity, reasonable timeframes for public participation while options are still open, access of the public to all relevant information, the right of the public to submit comments, and on the public authority to take due account of those comments, and finally a prompt notice once a decision has been made. If the activity is somehow updated or operating conditions are changed, this process of public participation must be repeated as appropriate. Now, with respect to the preparation of plans, programs, and policies relating to the environment, so let's say, for example, a program or a policy for the sustainable management of metals, in respect to draft legislation that may have a significant effect on the environment. So, for example, draft mining law, Articles 7 and 8 of the Convention provide a subset of obligations on public participation, including, for example, reasonable timeframes and ensuring effective public participation. So those are the extensive requirements in relation to the domestic and transboundary context. However, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Aarhus Convention also imposes an obligation in relation to public participation in international forums. And under Article 3.7, Aarhus parties are required to promote the principles of the Convention in international decision-making and within the framework of international organizations in matters relating to the environment. This means that, for example, Aarhus parties engaged in UNEA or when negotiating a future multilateral environmental agreement on the sustainable management of minerals and metals, they are under an obligation to promote the rights under the three pillars of the Aarhus Convention. Now, in 2005, the parties to the Convention also adopted the Almaty Guidelines, which provide general guidelines on how the Aarhus parties are meant to promote these principles in international forums. I won't go into detail on the Almaty Guidelines in the interest of time, but it provides a very useful guidance document for states to actually understand their obligation under Article 3.7 of the Convention. This is obviously directly relevant in the present context of both the upcoming global intergovernmental meeting and any future steps in the development of frameworks to enhance the sustainable management of minerals and metals. And the Aarhus parties should bear in mind the obligations under the Convention in that regard. And furthermore, the Aarhus Convention Secretariat also cooperates with secretariats of international forums to assist in promoting the effective public participation in international decision-making. Now, to close, I'd like to just reiterate that the Secretariat of the Aarhus Convention is It's grateful for the opportunity to outline the relevance of the convention in relation to the global intergovernmental meeting, and we stand by to provide further assistance as needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for sharing the perspectives from the Aarhus Convention, highlighting all three pillars, but particularly honing in on public participation. Pascal Peduzzi, Director of GRID Geneva, what can we do to strengthen the knowledge on sand, a topic that has already been mentioned?
Yes, thank you, Arnold. It's quite impressive, actually, this question of sand, because I'm holding in my hand the two things that we are using most, water, and at all, this is what we use most, human. And the second thing is sand, and that glass is actually made of sand. And we don't tend to think that sand is such a big thing, but each of you have been using 18 kilograms of sand today. So let's review why is that so. In green in this slide, you see that in 2020, the weight of human buildings, all the infrastructure that we've been building, have exceeded the weight of the dry biomass. So you're taking the entire weight of the entire vegetation of planet Earth, and if you look at concrete, asphalt, and all the build material, roads, and so on, the weight of those infrastructures has exceeded the weight of natural vegetation. And this is quite impressive that human has come to this level of modification of planet Earth. So every year we're using 50 billion tons of sand and gravel. That's enough to build a wall of 27-meter high, 27-meter wide, all around equator every year. That's the amount of sand we're using. And obviously, it has tremendous impact on the environment, depending where it is taken. This is taken on the beach, for example. Then imagine the status of this beach after just 1 day of operation. It will weaken the role of the beach for protecting us against storm surge, salination of aquifers, of course, preventing touristic development of this beach and having impact on turtles, crabs, and so on. And if you take that on rivers, it will change the beds of the rivers, so the river flows, the turbidity, also the fauna will be affected. And if you take that in marine environment, look at these vessels, it looks like a giant vacuum cleaner, and that's exactly what it does. It will sterilize the bottom of the sea and reject fine particles that change the turbidity. All those microorganisms that are being crunched do not feed the fishes anymore, so it has impact on biodiversity and fishing. And that's why we've been working on this one. We don't tend to see sand as a strategic material, but we should, because our entire society is built literally on sand. Look around you, the floors you're in, it's concrete, the walls, the glass of the windows, the roads, the bridges, the hospital, schools. Nothing could be built without concrete, and concrete is cement, sand, and gravel. And we don't depend on sand only like for solar panels, for dams, for hydropower, so it's also for energy, renewable energy, we will need a lot of sand. Now, we don't depend only for infrastructures as a building material. We also need sand for the aquifers. We tend to think about aquifers about a patch of water, but it's not. It's actually small cracks between sand and gravels where we are pumping the water. We depend on sand for protecting our shoreline, for supporting biodiversity, for supporting a lot of the work that we do with nature is actually depending on this sand and gravel. So we have all this kind of dependency, and we think it's just banal. But it's not. It's a strategic material. So UNEP has been publishing now 4 reports on the question of sand, and this has led to several international resolutions in motion, and the one we're talking about is this one with the point 4 of Resolution 12, requesting my office, the Center of GRID Geneva within UNEP, to strengthen scientific, technical, and policy knowledge with regard to sand. So we've been publishing this report, 10 strategic recommendations to avert a crisis on sand. But one of the proposals that we have submitted to the member states in our resolutions during the consultation in regional consultations was to create a global sand observatory. So we have observatory on energy, on water, on biodiversity, on many things, but strangely enough, the second material after water that is being used by human has no observatory. As a result, we don't know exactly how much we use, what are the impacts, how we could best improve these extractions and reduce the impact, and so on. So the the proposal is to create this global observatory, not as a full center, because that would be very expensive. We propose to use existing organization and to create a small secretariat that will coordinate a network of partners already working on this issue of sand. And we're taking back from the resolution the three different pillars of that point 4, which is on science, technology, and policy. We propose to have 3 working groups. The one on science, that would be about monitoring, creating data, looking at the impacts, bringing data and transparency on where sand is being extracted in marine environment, in river environment, on terrestrial environment. Then the second working group would be on policy and standards, looking at what are the existing policies, what are the ones that are successful, and those ones we could be inspired from other countries that want to improve their policies. Also looking at industrial standards, how we can extract sand with limiting their impact on the environment, how to improve the building standards to use less sand, for example. And finally, also to push the development agencies like the World Bank, HANPAT, and others on when they are financing a large infrastructure, be a highway, harbors, and schools, whatever, to make sure that the material is coming from sustainable sources, which is not the case, unfortunately, so far. And finally, the third group would be to look at solutions, so technology. How can we improve our technology to reduce sand, to substitute by other types of material, to think differently, and so that we don't need as much sand. And so small secretariat, this is what we've been proposed. The African region was really the one that was calling that by every single member state present. In other regions, we had really good support as well for this idea, but that will be decided in a few days in Geneva for the global consultation. And just a small advertising at the World Resource Forum, we're going to launch our platform for monitoring the extraction of sand in the marine environment, so that will be part of the working group 1 of this Global Sand Observatory. We've been training an artificial intelligence for detecting vessels dredging sands worldwide from 2012 to now. That would shed more transparency on this very important issue. Back to you, Ardo. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Pascal, for outlining the concrete proposals that will be decided in a few days' time, as you said, to strengthen our knowledge on sand, but also, as you said, to view it more as a strategic material and not, I think, as you said, a banal material in the context of what we're discussing here. Gyubin Huang is the global focal point for children and youth in the major group setting of UNEP, and Gyubin will share with us the youth perspectives for the Intergovernmental meeting. Gyubin, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction. So I am global focal point to the Children and Youth Major Group of UNEP, which means I work with my colleagues from across the civil society sphere to collate youth voices and bring them to key intergovernmental negotiations and discussions like this. So I'm going to structure my 5 minutes in 3 sections. First, why youth are important. Second, how youth can contribute to resource governance. And third, how to improve the status quo. So next slide, please. The chart here is a global economic center of gravity, and that's changed over the past 30 years. It's moved eastwards and southwards. So what this means is that the future of mineral resource governance will skew 2 ways. First, they will skew young, and second, they'll be from emerging economies. Now, these are the groups that we have to empower in mineral resource governance for 2 reasons, because sustainable development is about meeting the needs of the present without sacrificing the ability of future generations to meet our needs. So the first group is, of course, future generations, because policies that reduce resource depletion and environmental degradation are essential to ensuring that we are able to meet future needs for critical resources and materials, and of course, prioritizing the development of sustainable resource governance and energy transition policies. And these work together to safeguard the planet for future generations. Second component is the Global South, and these are intersectional. Is to recognize that there are historic inequities in resource usages and extraction. And of course, much of what we call the Global South is the countries and regions which have traditionally been resource rich and have not been able to see the fruits of their resource riches. So we think a key component here is co-developing successful strategies and technologies with a focus on innovations, and that means working across generational and national boundaries to ensure that we can focus on renewable energy and resource management. Next slide, please. So the second component is how you think contribute to enhancing the environmental sustainability of minerals and metals along their full life cycle. The first, of course, is advocates for circular economic principles. Many of my colleagues are experts in circularity, in governance, in local ecosystems, and these groups, in most instances, in most countries, are the ones taking active initiatives to push these principles forward. They work with local communities, businesses, and industries to ensure that these principles are well understood and also acted upon. So the second is youth as drivers of technological innovation. As one of the most educated and environmentally literate generations in human history, young people are ideally placed to support a more sustainable extractive sector via research and innovation. So we think a focus on young researchers focused on metals management is a low risk, high reward way to ensure that we have a pathway towards better technologies to ensure that we can use less materials more sustainably with more circularity. The third component is as negotiators and drivers of policy. So in my capacity as global coordinator of the constituency, I work with colleagues, and we have local consultations, regional consultations to make sure that grassroots perspectives are brought to governments and to intergovernmental negotiations. So we call upon you to create platforms for young people to engage with policymakers, industry leaders, and this means engaging whenever and wherever possible. So there are many member state colleagues here. I would like to just pose the question and have a think about when you last heard from youth perspectives in the context of minerals resource governance. Perhaps it is time to encourage young people to speak up on these issues and provide crucial grassroots perspectives on these extremely important emerging issues that threaten communities around the world. And last slide, please. I'm not going to read the text to you, but these are just some ideas and considerations that are important into a heavily commodities-dependent future. It's inevitable that we have to have the energy transition, which requires mining more materials, nickel, cobalt, copper, and all the rest of them. But at the same time, you have to ensure that these developments are made in the context of sustainable development. And we encourage all of you to think about how to incorporate youth perspectives in planning and decision-making to ensure sustainability, not just for the next 10, 15 years, which is about how long it takes to develop a large mine, but also 30, 40, 50 years from now, so that your children and their children are set up for the future. We also encourage you to think about the policy and regulatory frameworks that support a more resource-efficient economy, even as the global population reaches 10 billion by 2050. So just a few thoughts to summarize youth perspectives. Thank you very much for the floor. Back to the host. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gyubin, for highlighting the importance not only of youth perspectives in this process, but also highlighting that, of course, this is also an issue about intergenerational equity and future generations. Private sector. Inga Petersen, the Executive Director of the Global Battery Alliance. What are your perspectives on this process?
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm here representing private sector, but it's really essential to underline that the Global Battery Alliance is a multi-stakeholder partnership, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more. But it is true that we probably have some perspectives from the battery industry, which is ultimately a major consumer of the acceleration in extractive activities, especially if we're looking at the key ingredients like lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, but also copper. So if we're looking at all the gigafactories that have been built to feed ultimately the electrification of the power and the transport sector, estimates go that we need about 380 new mines by 2035. So the environmental, social governance impacts of that are obviously tremendous. So I'm happy to share a couple of perspectives today from that battery ecosystem. I won't go through all the slides in detail, but of course you can reach out and either request the deck or also check our website. So the Global Battery Alliance is a multi-stakeholder partnership. We were initially created as an initiative of the World Economic Forum. As a consequence of that realization how essential batteries are going to be, because electrification of transport sector is one thing, but when you're looking at renewable energy, batteries play a key role in actually solving the intermittency problem that you have with wind or solar energy, for example. So these partners came together to realize that the issues that are typically associated with battery value chains, many of which are upstream. So specifically, some of you may be thinking about child labor issues and cobalt value chains in the DRC, especially the artisanal sector, but also the battery carbon footprint. So the carbon intensity of actually producing batteries. And these members came together to say we actually need multi-stakeholder partnership to address these because these are complex issues, but we also need collective action that spans the entire battery value chain to solve these. So not just government or not just mining companies, that can resolve these. So since then, we've grown to over 140 organizations, and you see here on the right-hand side the private sector organizations that are active. So it does include some of the world's biggest mining companies, but also cell manufacturers and car manufacturers like Tesla or Volkswagen and others, but also all the way down to the recyclers, and then in partnership with public organizations, non-governmental organizations, and academia. One of the key instruments or one of the key actions or principles that all of these members have signed up for are our 10 guiding principles. And our vision that is ultimately structured around a threefold objective of scaling sustainable, circular, and responsible battery value chains by 2030. And we've worked specifically on Principle 4, disclosing and progressively reducing carbon emissions, and also Principle 8, immediately and urgently eliminating child labor from battery value chains. If you look at how may this be achieved, one of the key instruments that the GBA has conceptualized and which has actually been picked up by the European Union in the EU battery regulation is that of the battery passport. And the battery passport, I think, is quite emblematic for the trend of digital product passports and the demand for greater transparency and accountability across the entire value chain. So what the digital product passport does, or in this case, the battery passport, is to create a digital twin of a physical battery that combines reporting on 3 core elements. One is the provenance data, so the actual tracking and tracing of the material flows. Where was the specific cobalt mined? Where was it refined? Where was it processed? Where was the cell manufactured, etc., until it's placed in the actual vehicle. And then secondly, the technical parameters of the battery, so everything that's capacity, charging rates, temperature range, all these manufacturing history, etc. And then the third component, and this is really where we focused our efforts over the past few years, is how do you combine that with consistent and comparable reporting on the sustainability performance of that product. So we've worked specifically on defining what good sustainability performance could actually look like for 3 priority dimensions, one being the battery carbon footprint. So we published a greenhouse gas rule book on how to calculate that battery carbon footprint in an accurate, verifiable, and transferable manner, comparable manner. And secondly, child labor and human rights indices to set out some of the pathways with which companies can actually address the root causes of child labor in their value chains. We've also been able to show that it can actually work in practice by launching the world's first battery passport proof of concept earlier this year, where we've had 3 value chains for 3 different battery products placed in Audi and Tesla cars report against these rulebooks, at least subsets of these indicators, to achieve comparable results at the product level. And in the future, we want to benchmark the data coming out of the batteries and issue a quality seal for batteries, because we really believe that in the future, sustainability performance, verifiable sustainability performance at the product level will be a key business differentiator, in addition to cost, of course, or the manufacturing history of those materials. And from my perspective, it really sort of forecasts a key trend here, where especially if you're looking at the geopolitics of the mining sector, but also the battery industry, where we're really looking at sort of relocalizing battery value chains in different regions of the world, and you see big, subsidy packages to try and achieve that. Sustainability performance is going to be a key differentiator on which these products can compete in addition to cost. So this is maybe just something to bear in mind, because when I'm looking at it from an intergovernmental perspective, what we do not have at the moment are internationally harmonized standards when it comes to defining what good sustainability performance actually looks like across the value chain. So of course, there's voluntary sustainability standards, there's some regulatory due diligence, there's OECD frameworks, but in terms of having really comprehensive, harmonized benchmarks for what good sustainability performance looks like, how is it validated, what is the type of data governance for these reporting systems. This is really where the GBA has been focusing a lot of effort, because even though the EU might be driving this from a regulatory perspective, we do anticipate that other regions will follow suit. I was in China last week, and they're just looking also at developing frameworks to calculate battery carbon footprint. So we really feel it's critically important that we all speak the same language, even if different data or different regions might want to emphasize different requirements for sustainability performance. The rules on how we collect that data and what we're reporting against should ideally be the same. So maybe I just close with an open invitation also to join this process that we've kicked off. And to support it, it's also open to government, to public sector participation. And we're currently going through with our members a prioritization exercise of what are the next key priority indicators that actually need to be part of the battery passport. Is this going to be biodiversity or pollution, eco-design, etc.? So maybe, yeah, just a couple of perspectives from that ecosystem or of a major consumer of these minerals. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these perspectives. And indeed, I think you've highlighted what perhaps this major consumer of the minerals would also need to improve, as you have termed it, sustainable performance at the product level, and the need for efforts at a more harmonized approach at the global level. Concluding this whirlwind of stakeholder perspectives is John Angelo Bonifacio. He is the spokesperson of the International People's Conference on Mining. The floor is yours.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Good day, and thank you so much to the UNEP and, of course, the Geneva Environment Network for the opportunity to both speak and participate in this event. As part of the International People's Conference of Mining, we were able to engage in one of the consultations, specifically the one in Thailand, where issues like tailings management and sand issues were discussed. I'll try to keep my intervention short and sweet. So, but of course, as everybody has mentioned previously, mining and minerals management has taken on new and complex dimensions. We have challenges like the renewable energy transition coming to the fore. And of course, with all of these challenges, unfortunately, communities across the globe continue to face threats of environmental degradation as well as human rights violations in relation to, for example, protecting their lands from destructive practices. It's becoming clearer and clearer that the previous and unfortunately continuing regime of relentless resource extraction has come at the detriment of communities and ecosystems across the world, and this really needs to be addressed. So in relation to the participation of civil society in general, we believe that there's still a lot of work to be done. I think it was highlighted previously in engaging with and including more civil society groups into these discussions, especially those coming from communities on the ground and who are directly affected by mining. In line with this, it's vital that communities and civil society get to see how these discussions on the international level can become relevant to the realities faced on the ground and how there can be real changes to the lived experiences of those belonging to these impacted communities and ecosystems. So whether this means dialogues at the regional, national, or international level, these opportunities need to be explored so as to include the diverse perspectives of different groups from the civil society. And there's also much to be done in recognition of the fact that, as mentioned previously, a significant portion of attacks against land and environmental defenders across the globe are connected with mining projects, unfortunately. And so if we wish to include civil society in discussions around the mining industry, this must be addressed and discussed as well. So again, we're at this critical juncture where we face, again, the triple threat of climate change, biodiversity collapse, rampant pollution, and amidst the calls for systemic changes to address the growing issues related to these crises, there's also the opportunity to chart a new path. And that's what we're looking forward to. Hopefully, the process can be continued with the upcoming meeting and, of course, beyond. So again, the upcoming meeting does present a venue to address both the continuing and emerging problems, but it's critical that issues from grassroots communities, from those most affected by the issues related to mining and minerals management, are put on the agenda. And I think it's important that we all realize that the path forward must be rooted in an approach that puts people and planet first. And this means, among many other things, genuinely listening to and engaging with the grassroots communities and civil society. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your perspectives as well as hopes, I guess, for this process going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the formal part of the briefing, but as promised in the beginning, I've not been as good a timekeeper as I hoped I would be, but we do have a few minutes for any questions that you may have. We will start off perhaps with any questions in the room, but of course, colleagues who have joined us and participants who have joined us online can also submit questions online, and we will take those as well. There I see here. Madam, please. One in the middle.
This one.
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Please, if you could introduce yourself and who you would like to pose the question to.
Right. Yes, my name is Thandika Tlholo. I'm actually here as an observer for the UNEP Civil Society Unit, but I'm representing an accredited organization called Botswana Green Building Council. And I just happen to be living in Geneva for now, learning French. So, so my question is to, I think, everybody who can potentially support either dialogues or generation of strategic information to ensure engagement of the civil society and the key and vulnerable populations in this agenda. So I happen to be involved in assessing the barriers to care, though, from the human rights and gender perspective in 6 African countries with mining. And that is currently funded by the Global Fund, but under the TB framework. And we finally concluded that the issues in the community, not just the miners, the ex-miners and the families, the issues in the communities are beyond health. And there is no how, since the project started in 2012 till now, there is no how they would have been able to achieve the objectives of how to make sure that the community living in the mining sector are also protected from all these other external forces, including climate change. So we did gather a lot of quantitative...
Sorry to press you a little bit, but we're short on time. Who would you like to ask the question to? And if you could I'm going precisely formulate the question.
Yes, so we did gather a lot of data. We can be analyzed to answer questions related to what we're doing now. So I was just wondering then, who do we reach out to make sure that we do analyze that data, because there's already existing data now through that project.
Okay, so no question, more of a comment. We, I think, had a few more questions. Yes.
I'm Valerie Sumo. I have 2 hats. I'm on one side municipal councillor in a small village here in Canton de Vaud. And on the other side, I have my company active in waste and energy in DRC. So my question goes to Madame Rhone. We have here in Switzerland a company called Bühler, which is the #1 leader for the step #1 for the batteries. So could act like a catalyst in the sense that even China is using Bühler equipment. So if we don't want to be hypocrite, because yes, Madame Peterson, we can have standards, but we are no longer on the stage of standards. There's either we extract and we import, for example, here in Switzerland, goods that are legally exported, so without child labor and all those bad things. Either we are acting as collaborative to those bad things. Standards are no more an option. Either we are on the side of the good things, or either we just stop. Because I don't like, and that's why I said I'm a municipal councillor. It's a little bit hypocrite to say, yes, we will have more electrical vehicles, while we perfectly know that cobalt is coming from DRC on a very, very bad way. I'm in DRC every month. And then I'm talking to EGC, which is Entreprise Générale du Cobalt. I've seen on one slide Mr. Sobotka and so on. This is not acceptable anymore. So leave the standard. So my question to Madame Rohner is, are you going to ask the leader number one, which is a Swiss leader, for the step number one, what we called the slurry step, which is a kind of sauce with nickel, cobalt, and so on, which is a know-how from Switzerland to put action and to put pressure on China and the other countries. The only competition that we have is LG from South Korea. So I think Switzerland has a role to play, and I like Bühler. Bühler is a very good company, but through that catalyst, because Bühler is again the number one equipment producer for the step number one.
To press you as well.
Can you put pressure on Switzerland to be a catalyst for the value chain of the batteries for electrical vehicles, solar panels, and so on? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and apologies for pressing, but we want to get as many questions in as we can. Let's take maybe one more from the room, and then we have one online, and then we give it back to the panelists. Please.
Boris Engelson, a local journalist freelance. I would have hundreds of questions, sure, so I will just take one to the Aarhus Convention. In which way all these rights and demands, access to information, public participation, access to justice, are not secured in most democratic countries so far?
Thank you very much, and my apologies that we have to leave it there with questions from the room. And for those who have posed online questions, those we were not able to answer now, we will get back to those participants who have asked questions. But we would like to take one question that Lilian Cora has posed online to all the panelists. And she is from the International Society of Doctors for the Environment, and highlights the importance of considering the aspects of health in this entire process. Particularly, she highlights the burden of disease of lead and others, which are very preoccupant and affects in particular production chains when it comes to minerals and metals. And the question is to all panelists, so I will ask for maybe volunteers who want to react to that. But if not, maybe, I don't know, Elisa and colleagues in Paris, if you would like to speak on the data issue that the first question raised, perhaps you are best placed to speak to that.
Thanks, Arnold. And I'll probably also take the opportunity to jump to the very last question that Lilia has been asking, because one of the very strategic aspects of the mandate that has been given by the resolution is really to bring around the table, also from the UN system more broadly and from other intergovernmental processes, everything that connects to this agenda. And obviously, we do have the opportunity to speak to the UN system, and particularly to reach out to our partners, our peers in UN agencies, particularly those looking at how to address human rights and human rights concerns, in addition to those that are directly linked to the environmental agenda, and to make sure that we can devise with them solution and approaches that we could be bringing forward. So I feel it would be interesting to know a little bit more about the case that has been illustrated in the context of the first intervention, to be able to provide a little bit more of a concrete and practical advice. And the very last intervention that speaks to some specific metals and the health connection, I feel that there's also another very strategic opportunity coming up in September. That is ICCM5, the International Conference on Chemicals Management, that will also have most likely a very strong opportunity to discuss of the issues that Lilian has been raising. So I feel there's a lot that we can build in terms of synergies between those two processes and those two conversations, and to make sure that there is no risk that those very strategic aspects are falling in between the two, but rather are being supported synergistically by those two conversations. Arnold, I'll be handing back to you in the interest of time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elisa. Martin, there was a direct question to you on the role of Switzerland as a catalyst, but feel free to also, as co-chair of the process, if you want to reflect on the last question on the health issues.
Yes, thank you very much for the active participation also from all of you. I'm sure you will have a further question in your head. You can also exchange that during the global meeting, but also before the global meeting, we will have the World Resource Forum in Geneva, in the same building, where there is many different sessions, politics session, scientific session. It's also an opportunity to discuss all these questions. And regarding the very specific question to Switzerland, come to this platform of stakeholder, of exchange together, which are the good practices, which are the practices we should avoid, because sometimes there is long time practices which are not good, and we should see the way forward, what we can go ahead. And I would like also to respond a little bit to the question regarding the Aarhus Convention, because you mentioned the rapporteur to defender of the rights, and it has a huge impact. I can imagine if a defender is going to RDC and see and say, okay, there is some problem there with this firm, even if it is not in one of the Aarhus country, but is connected to the Aarhus because of the states. The countries will have to respond, the countries which have the owner there. So very important. So I give you back the floor. I will not come back at the end again as it was foreseen, but my as co-chair, my voice to you is really come to Geneva, come in person to this global meeting. Don't forget to register very correctly because we are short on time before the 1st of September, and it will be for sure very good meeting there.
Thank you, Martin, and fully understood. And we are, as I said, very grateful for Switzerland's leadership of this process. And as you have said, the upcoming meeting is a further opportunity for all the stakeholders to engage and help in finding the best ways forward. Teresa, there was finally a very concrete question to you from Boris in the room.
Yes, just to touch upon also first the Special Rapporteur's mandate. As legal officer, the Aarhus Convention assists the Special Rapporteur and is under his mandate. And so just to clarify a little what his mandate involves, because we do receive a lot of complaints and a lot of questions for clarification. So maybe it also helps to explain that in the room. As Martin mentioned, generally, the Special Rapporteur's mandate is to receive complaints from the 47 parties of the Aarhus Convention. However, if there is, for example, a multilateral company that is headquartered in one of the member states, and one of the states parties to the Aarhus Convention, and is involved in penalization, persecution, or harassment of an environmental defender outside of Aarhus parties, that would still fall within the mandate of the Special Rapporteur. So to keep that in mind, there is an extraterritorial scope to his mandate. The information about his mandate, including the decision that's the basis of his mandate, is online. And the Secretariat, we're always happy to provide further information in case there are questions. Then with regards to the specific question that I received, so I understood it to be how the rights under the Aarhus Convention are not already secured in democratic societies. Is that correct? How the rights under the convention are not already secured in democratic?
I thought, but maybe I'm very candid, that in most democratic countries or society, there was access to information, there was public participation, and there is access to justice. But I am being told every day in Dutch gremia like here that it is not the case at all, and it is just a optical or phonetic illusion, but we must revamp the system from scratch. So I am very keen to hear.
Okay, so maybe to give a bit of a background about the bodies under the convention, there is a compliance committee that receives complaints from the public or from states or from the states themselves about the convention. We currently have over 200 complaints about non-compliance with the rights under the convention. And those complaints also come from a lot of what people might define as democratic societies. So the cases involved are issues like, for example, public participation takes place, but it takes place at a time when all substantive decisions are already taken. So it's not effective public participation. The public is not properly notified of the public participation that is taking place. So they're notified too late or notified only through newspapers, but not through other means. Access to justice. There are a lot of access to justice issues about standing. NGOs that don't have standing to challenge decisions in courts. So unfortunately, there is significant non-compliance across Aarhus parties. And if you look at the complaints that the compliance committee receives, you get an idea of what the kind of issues are that they usually deal with. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And I guess you can also have a bilateral with Boris afterwards. Any final words from the panelists on any of the questions that were raised, particularly the one that was posed to all the panelists on environment and health? Inga?
I mean, maybe just a very brief comment, not going into any of the specifics, but I think the one thing that is clear to anybody working in any depth in this issue or adjacent issue to the green energy transition is that it's such a fundamental transition of entirety of modern life when it comes to how we organize our cities, our transport, our energy systems, global logistics. So there unfortunately are no easy solutions at all in terms of, pulling out of this country or doing it that way. Everything is basically a trade-off. And the only thing that we can do is try to create the framework conditions in which we mitigate this impact and in which we honestly look at the holistic picture of what the green transition actually demands and how we can manage these impacts, in a transparent way. So I don't think there's a silver bullet. And from our perspective, disengagement is almost never the answer because the complexities, are too high. There's also the question of hundreds of thousands of livelihoods being associated with these sectors. So we remain committed to always working to improve these conditions rather than disengaging and trying to find the easy way out. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I guess that brings us then to the end of this very important briefing. Inga, I think you've summarized very nicely, I think, the conclusions of this briefing as I would see them. Disengagement is never a solution. The challenges are momentous and the solutions are not easy. And probably we can only come to conclusions for a more sustainable management of metals and minerals if we all pull together. And that includes all the stakeholders that have spoken here today, who I want to thank very much for making time, for trying to stick to time as much as they could. Otherwise, the entire blame is on me. but also stakeholders that perhaps did not get a chance to be part of that briefing. And this leads us to the meeting, the Intergovernmental meeting on minerals and metals in September. And the hope clearly, I think that was expressed throughout this briefing, is that all these stakeholders, all the member states involved will continue with their productive engagement to, as Inge has said, bring us a little bit closer to perhaps the silver bullet that now seems still elusive, but that we come to a better way forward in terms of metals and minerals management. I want to also thank the GEN team around Diana and again, everybody who has participated in the room and online. Thank you very much, and until next time.
And actually, next time is tomorrow. Elisa mentioned the ICCM5 to the International Conference on the Management of Chemicals, which will take place in Bonn in September. Tomorrow in the same room, there's a briefing at the same time on that important conference with other stakeholders.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.